Welcome to EP Talks, the podcast that leads the K-12 industry in principle-specific professional learning. Today we are thrilled to have Marc Brackett, a renowned psychology professor at Yale University and the founder of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. With over 23 years' experience, Marc has developed the ruler approach to social and emotional learning, now embraced by thousands of schools worldwide. In this episode, Marc opens up about his personal journey from overcoming childhood trauma to becoming a champion for emotional intelligence in education. Join us as we explore the profound impact of empathy, listening, and non-judgmental support, and learn how these essential skills can transform educational leadership and student success. Inform, influence, inspire. Everyday Principle. Welcome back, EP Nation. In this episode, we have the distinct pleasure of welcoming a distinguished guest to EP Talks, Dr. Marc Brackett, author of a couple books that I'm going to let him talk a little bit more about and share a bit more about his story and his background and what gives him the street credibility to be here and part of this episode. He'll also be giving us the opportunity to learn more from him. So let's welcome Marc to EP Talks.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
All right. Well, tell us a little bit more about your background. As we navigate our way through this conversation, I know that I'm familiar with your books, but for our listeners that may not be as familiar about who you are and what you write about, give us a little bit about your background.
Sure. You want to start from birth or you want
to? We might get into that later.
Well, my day job is I'm a psychology professor at Yale University, and I've been in this role, in various capacities for about 23 years. I'm the founder and the director of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, which is a team of about 35 people who do lots of rigorous science and who work in thousands of schools, across the world. And I'm known for this approach to social and emotional learning that's called Ruler. That's now in 5,000 schools across the United States and in 33 other countries. And in particular, relevant to this group, as an approach to teaching emotional intelligence in education or in school settings, what I have found in my 25 years of running around the world trying to get schools to do this work is that it really starts with leaders. And if you don't have a school leader who lives it, models it, and provides opportunities for the educators and students to learn it and live it, it just doesn't ever have long-term sustainability. And then lastly, I wrote 2 books. My first book is called Permission to Feel, which is kind of like my baby. And proud to say that's now in 30 languages. And my newest book is called Dealing with Feeling. And that was a result of me thinking that I was an expert in emotional intelligence. And then the pandemic hit and my life changed quite a bit. And as did thousands of, not millions of other people. And what I found was that people were really struggling with regulating emotions. And so I decided to just spend 3 years doing more research and also studying other people's research to put together a book that I think can be really helpful.
Oh my gosh, that's excellent. Well, I'm super excited for you to talk a little bit more of that further down the line, but you mentioned that you're in 5,000 schools across the U.S., in schools worldwide, that is. And I want to go back to the origins of where this work began. What was the catalyst or the inspiration, or where did you find the need to produce this work?
Well, a lot of psychologists would say that's all me work. And so, it's kind of a weird thing, right? That here I am, this professor at a place like Yale, which, I never know what Yale was growing up, to be honest with you. I grew up in a very, my kind of stereotypical blue collar family. My father was an air conditioning repairman. He escaped the Bronx, New York to go to Jersey to have the good life. And he struggled, both emotionally and financially. My mom similarly, and and then I was a kid who grew up with modest modest stuff. Um, and my parents, I have two brothers, and both of them had some serious challenges. One of them was diagnosed with schizophrenia when he was a teenager, and the other one had physical illness, Crohn's disease, that was really debilitating. And my mother was just freaking out trying to handle these two kids while here was little Marc, 5 years old, 6 years old. And unfortunately, based on what they could afford and what they were doing, is they kind of put me uh, to stay for a long period of time with a neighbor who unfortunately was a pedophile. And so I was abused physically and sexually, mostly sexually, unfortunately. Well, either one is gross, but for about 5 years of my childhood, while my parents were trying to figure out what was going on with their own lives and with my other brother's lives. Anyway, suppressing of feelings, eating of feelings, denying of feelings. I didn't talk about it, which to this day, I'm 56 now, so this has started 50 years ago for me. I still can't believe that I didn't have the courage to tell my own parents what was happening to me. Now, as a psychologist, I get it, but I still have a hard time believing it. Given my personality, given who I am today, it just seems so weird and so sad that I was stuck with that pain for so long. But to not make this whole podcast about my childhood, I had an uncle who was a teacher, and an amazing middle school teacher who lived in the Catskill Mountains of New York State, who came and visited us frequently, and one summer was staying with us because he was getting a graduate degree. And lo and behold, he was the first adult to really ask me how I was feeling and to really be, as I call it now, an Uncle Marvin. And he gave me permission to feel. He wasn't my therapist. He was just an adult who would listen to me in a non-judgmental way and just showed a lot of empathy and compassion and unconditional support. And that really got me out of the abuse, and it got me out of my childhood trauma. And of course, my career is dedicated to Uncle Marvin because I took what he was doing, because he was building a curriculum literally in the 1970s to teach kids about emotions and social studies, which is kind of magical. And when I was trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life, I remembered, all my conversations with Uncle Marvin as a kid, and I decided to pull him out of retirement, and we wrote a curriculum together. And that was the beginning of my career, as a psychologist who works in schools.
That is incredible. I am familiar with the story of Uncle Marvin, but I'm so glad to be able to at least share a snippet of that with our listeners. Something you said really resonates with me. And as you were talking, it made me think, what is the entry point to be able to connect with people in general, but in particular, this work that you're doing and what we're doing together? And one thing I heard you say was that Uncle Marvin was the first person to listen. And I know that in my experience, listening has been, it's almost like an unspoken skill that we don't talk about it enough. We don't talk about how important listening is. And I think it can be misunderstood as not as valuable of a skill because you're just sitting there. But there's an art to listening. Now, I'm wondering if you could first unpack that art of listening, but also the second part of that is, in addition to listening, are there any other particular entry point skills that help steward this work?
Yeah. So just to put this into perspective of why the listening is so important, let me just give you a little bit more research, and then we'll go back to the pieces that you're talking to just put it in context. So I have this Uncle Marvin, radically changes my life. I write this book called Permission to Feel. I run around the world talking about it. And I decided, I need to do more research. Who has an Uncle Marvin? Who doesn't have an Uncle Marvin? Or an Aunt Maria, or a parent, or a teacher, or a coach, or a grandparent, whoever. How many people have someone that gives them permission to feel? And what I found in already 70 studies, I became a little obsessive compulsive about this. I did 70 studies and found no differences within the studies, that only a third of people say they have someone in their life when they're a kid. 2/3 of us don't have an adult in our lives when we're a child with whom we feel comfortable, talking about feelings. That sucks, just to be blunt.
Yeah.
And of the third, the characteristics of our Uncle Marvins or Aunt Marias are non-judgmental, good listeners who show empathy and compassion. I mean, there are other things like supportive and caring, but the top three across the board always kind of lean toward non-judgmental, good listening, and empathy and compassion. And it kind of like blows my mind. Like, that's not like rocket science, And, but yet, I think so many of us feel judged from the moment we are kind of brought into this world based on our skin color, based on our gender, our sexual orientation. Not that we know that when we're birth, but you know what I mean. As we get older, our femininity, our masculinity, our preferences that are different. I mean, politics are a huge issue these days. Everybody's just judging everybody constantly. And people are just desperate to be free of judgment. The listening piece, I think, is fascinating because, as you brought up, uh, just people don't feel listened to. Um, and then the empathy and compassion to me also is like, really? But people don't feel like people really show that unconditional love and support as much as they could. And so you might wonder also, does it matter? Because, part of the research that I do, some people question like, all right, Mark, enough with this non-judgment listening stuff. But I'm interested in what it predicts about people's lives. And so what I found is that people who feel listened to as a child, who feel like they were in a relationship that didn't have a lot of judgment, and who had someone who showed their empathy and compassion as adults, have better mental health, better physical health, sleep better at night, higher emotional intelligence, and higher life satisfaction, and greater purpose and meaning in life. So it's predicting pretty valuable things about people's lives.
Yeah. Yeah, that's incredible. I'm wondering too, as you work with schools and with school districts, you're talking to and you're teaching and training adults. And I'm wondering, in your experience, what you're giving us permission to do is, well, in your experience and in your research, for the top three, non-judgmental, listening, empathy, and compassion, what are the barriers to adults being able to provide that for kids?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a great question because there's a lot of backlash right now in our field. And one of the primary backlashes is that people like me are saying that teachers need to be therapists. And I think they fear that. Like, I'm not trained to be a counselor or a social worker or a psychologist. And I always tell people, that's not what I'm asking you to do. Showing up with compassion and listening and being non-judgmental has nothing to do with, I mean, it's great if you're a therapist. Make sure you are non-judgmental and a good listener and empathic as a therapist. But it's just, we're looking for people in our lives that just, show up for us that way, have presence. And so I always make jokes like, if you're in middle school, and, a kid is feeling left out because they didn't get chosen for the team and they're feeling sad, the gym teacher or the phys ed teacher is not going to say, go to therapy. It's like, no, you're going to create a better condition for this kid so the kid feels confident and safe and supported. The kid who's struggling with math anxiety and like, I can't handle this math anxiety you're having. You need to go for therapy. No, you're going to help the kid understand why they have anxiety, and you're going to support them in, managing their feelings before they take a test so they can do better. I mean, it's just ridiculous why we're so afraid of it. And the number one barrier, based on what I was just sharing with you, is fear. Like, I'm afraid, I don't know how to do it. I didn't have it. But that's tied to the skill set. I don't have the skills. And I think what's so really beautiful about the research is that no one ever says, I want someone who is a fixer, a problem solver for me. They don't even say something like, I want smartness or, are people with wisdom. Everything that people are asking for is the social and emotional attributes. And so that's just a real interesting thing to me that when we're, of course, if I'm trying to become a better statistician, I want someone who's really smart and knows how to do stats. But to be a human that feels cared for, that can like have self-esteem and grow, I'm not looking for the brightest crayon in the box. I'm not looking for the person to say, Mark, you should do this, and then this, and then this, and then that, and then you're going to be successful. No, I'm looking for presence. And so, relatedly to the barriers, is that I don't think every teacher can be every kid's Uncle Marvin. I think that is unrealistic because there's more than just the characteristics. It's about the jiving that you have with a person. And I jive with my uncle because he was really, for me, he was like this weirdo teacher slash trumpet player. And I'd watch my uncle on stage and I'd be like, oh my God, that's my uncle. um and and so that, I think that was part of the relationship. It was great that he had those skills. My real point in all this is that I think every single person listening to this podcast, and every single teacher and every single parent and school leader, superintendent, could probably get 10% better at showing empathy, at listening to people they're around, and being non-judgmental. And if we can just strive towards that, I think kids would have a lot better experience in school.
Yeah, I love how you said that. It's about getting better. It's not about being perfect. It's not about, being the solution for everybody's problem. And I think that and I agree with you. I think that there's a fear. Inherently, people have a fear of the unknown. Inherently, people have fear of feeling, if they feel inadequate or ill prepared, right? So that makes sense that there's an association with that. But a couple of things that you said that I think are really important is that being a good listener, having empathy and compassion, is not, it doesn't also carry the responsibility of diagnosing and prescribing a solution. And I think that's really, really important for all of us to know.
Well, and on top of that, Andre, is that it's not helpful for kids to solve their problems for them. It doesn't build the resilience muscle. And so the Uncle Marvin actually is quite skilled at, because remember, listening, going back to the earlier question that I didn't really get at, is listening is not just sitting there like this, not you're listening with your whole body. You're listening with your facial expressions, with your paraphrasing. You're listening by taking in and asking really creative, open-ended questions to get people to think more deeply about their experience and to problem solve. And so what I find, really fascinating is that the fear that people have that I don't have the therapy degree, or I didn't have this. What the real skill set that needs to be developed is the listening and the questioning skills, because that's what helps kids reflect, and think, critically about their experiences and come up with solutions for themselves, which is what we want in life. We don't want codependent kids. We want kids who who grow and have that mental capacity to problem solve, not only about academically oriented stuff, but about relationships and difficult emotions.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think that's I'm wondering if this is true. You had mentioned something about that every not not every teacher can be everyone's Uncle Marvin or school leader. Whatever role you play in K-12 education makes me think that part of the reason why Uncle Marvin was your Uncle Marvin is because he was Uncle Marvin to you, you know? And so I think that's an important thing for our listeners to know too, because I have been in this position where you acquire some new knowledge or you develop a new skill, and there's this unspoken pressure that we put on ourselves that, okay, well, now we have to impact as many people.
No, but I want to just a little bit of pushback on that, which is that we can't be that one. Not everybody can be that single Uncle Marvin for every child, but we can all show up in life in our roles. I'm a leader. I run a team of 35 people. Um, a school principal is a leader, having tons of faculty and staff. A teacher is a leader, having tons of students. We're all in many of the roles that we have in education. We're in leadership roles, meaning that we have people who are looking to us, for knowledge and support. And if we can all just show up, like whenever we're having a meeting, can I show up with being not with a preconceived judgment about the person in my head? Can I just listen more to that person, be fully present with them, like I'm trying to be with you right now? And can I, if I hear things that are not going so well for that person, can I just let them know that I really care and that I'm here for them? I do believe that everybody, I mean, like the 400 million people that live in our country here, everyone can improve in that.
Okay, well, I accept the challenge. So let's pivot a little bit. I know that you, I know that your research and your angle, for a lack of better words, is really focused on impacting youth, children. Can we talk a little bit about, for the vast majority of our listeners, will be building or district level leaders? And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about, from that perspective, how does the building or district level leader take and implement this work with other adults versus students?
Well, I think all of us in education, our kind of end product or end goal is to make sure every kid has purpose and meaning, learns great things and achieves whatever they're interested in their lives. But that doesn't just happen. There needs to be inputs and supports. And so obviously we need, and I learned this, by the way, the real story of Ruler, which is our school-based model, is that I thought everyone was an Uncle Marvin. I mean, I had Uncle Marvin. And I thought, like, oh my gosh, if we just write this little curriculum and give it to teachers, they're all going to become Uncle Marvins and the world's going to be a better place. And we failed terribly because of the things that we spoke about. Many teachers would say things like, I'm not comfortable talking about anxiety. Despair, I'm not going there. Whatever. It was just like all this resistance. My job is not to talk to students about failings, and they'd walk out of the room. I'm like, oh gosh, like, whew, I guess you're not an Uncle Marvin. And so I learned that we have to work with teachers. That was a big deal. And we wrote curricula and training programs and like just helping the teachers see the value proposition for being an emotionally intelligent role model and teaching the skills. And we had more success. However, just to, I love school leaders, but they can be winners. And so I'm in a school, tons of schools. And I'll give you a couple examples. One, the school leader says, we welcome Marc and his team here to do the training, and I know you all really need this. I'm like, ooh, like I don't like that one. And then that principal left the room. I'm like, oh, this is not going to go well. Then another example was, on the break at one of the trainings in August, a teacher came up to me. She's like, this is great stuff, but our principal's already told us that we can't even touch your content until after the state tests. I'm like, it's freaking August. And like the state tests are in May. Like, what are we doing here? And so the mindsets of the leaders just wasn't there yet. They didn't really see, oh, this actually helps learning. This actually helps teachers. This actually helps culture and climate. So we went back to the drawing board and started working with really amazing school leaders that I met throughout the years. And we all collaborated and thought about what is a leadership program that's necessary to get the leaders to see the value so that they can create a more positive culture and climate in their schools and be role models for emotional intelligence. And then the teachers would want to do it, and then the students would want to do it. And then we did a whole family piece too. And then we had to go up to, because I started working in big districts like New York City with 1,100, schools, and it was crazy. And so we started creating, like state level. In Connecticut, we have a state level project. So going back to the leadership piece, I mean, just think about it. A school leader could come from an art background, a science background, a language arts background, a math background. It doesn't really matter. If they want to be a principal, they can have been a teacher in any subject area, most likely. But if they're not emotionally intelligent, eesh, it's tough. Nobody wants, it's like if they can't deal with people's feelings, which people have a lot of feelings, especially these days, in terms of the burnout, the stress, the overwhelm, the difficult parents, school boards, all that stuff, it's going to be tough. And what I found, and we published this research, by the way, during the pandemic, we did a longitudinal study of school principals, and we looked at their own emotion skills, like how skilled were they at dealing with their own emotions. So I could say, Andre, how skilled are you, at managing your stress? Like when you're stressed out, do you go to like alcohol, binge eating, yelling, screaming, or do you go to more healthy strategies? You don't have to tell me this.
Okay, I won't.
Thank you. We're going to save the podcast. But so there's like the self-regulation piece, right? Like, do teachers, when they, or my team, when they look at me, they're like, gosh, Marc is amazing. Like, he can really, he gets pummeled by the news, or, people don't like this stuff, and he just takes deep breaths and moves on and keeps going and doesn't let it get to him. That's self-regulation, right? Then there's co-regulation, which is what I read about in my new book, because it's a misunderstood piece of emotion regulation, that it's not just about self-control. It's about how I support you. If you were my teacher in my school, Andre, how do I help you regulate your feelings? And so, just think about during the pandemic, people are freaking out, mask, no mask, all this crazy stuff going on, vaccines, no vaccines, parents yelling, screaming, kids having breakdowns. And so do I show up in the faculty meeting as a leader and say, you know what, this is really freaking weird, and like, good luck, because I have no clue what to do. Or like, I don't know about you, but I think the world's coming to an end. That's not good co-regulation, right? Good co-regulation in a school principal role is having the ability to hold a room where there's a lot of negativity or stress. It's the ability to let people know that you're there for them, that you're supporting them, that you're thinking creatively about how to make their lives better, not worse. And so what I found was that school leaders who were highly self-regulated and also highly skilled at co-regulation during the pandemic had teachers who were significantly less burnt out, teachers who significantly had stronger pleasant versus unpleasant emotions while teaching, less frustration, greater inspiration, for example. And even interestingly and surprisingly, teachers reported having better sleep quality. And I just think that there's a biological effect of having a good leader. Like when you know that you go to work in the morning and you can predict that you're going to have a leader that can hold the school, it just helps you. It helps your nervous system be more at ease. So I think it's pretty powerful.
Yeah, well, that's the psychological safety, and I totally agree with you. It's like there are so many parallels between the student-teacher relationship and the faculty-principal relationship. One question that I was going to follow up with, but you answered it perfectly. So those of you that are listening, rewind about 3 minutes and listen to this over and over again. But what I wanted to ask you about is that value proposition. You essentially, if you're bringing this research to people who aren't familiar with the work, um, you know, who have backed away from every emotion that they've ever felt, or you have to, all intents and purposes, you've become a salesman, right? You're trying to help them understand what's the reciprocal value in this. But you answer that, and I think you gave so many real examples as an acting middle school principal myself right now. I'm hearing you, and I'm kind of like checking the boxes in my mental list, all the reasons why building leaders should really embrace what you have to offer. So thank you for that.
Yeah. One thing you should know, which is interesting for leaders to know, is that our self-rated skills don't correlate very highly with our actual skills. I've met some schoolies of Mark, there's one thing I know, I'm highly emotionally intelligent. I'm like, you know, just to let you know, the research proves otherwise. Now, some people are self-aware, but most of us aren't about these things, which I think is really interesting. You know, it's like compared to what? If you ask me, Mark, how emotionally skilled are you? I'm like, well, compared to my father, I'm a genius, right? But compared to the Dalai Lama, oh yeah, I could use some work. So it's the reference points are complicated. Yeah, it's like right. I know I'm anxious, but like I'm incapacitated.
Right.
And so it's like, oh, okay, well, self-awareness is the first step, but you got to now, work on it and do something about it, like learn the strategies to regulate. That's kind of, you know, it was really eye-opening for me, with the pandemic, with working, in my own center and at schools, in terms of why I wrote the new book, Dealing with Feeling, because I just realized that so many people did not really learn how to regulate their feelings. No formal education. Do you know that in the thousands of people that I surveyed, only 10% of people said they had any kind of like real knowledge base of like what it meant, how to define it, what the discrete skills were. Only 7% said they learned anything about this while they were in school. So it's amazing that we have a society that can exist at this point. And to the point, we do learn these things implicitly. I think we learn them on sports teams. I think we learn them, in school by having to like self-regulate for learning. But unfortunately, most of us have automatic go-to unhelpful ways of dealing with our emotions. I learned, from my father, basically drink alcohol and yell. And I learned from my mother, basically have nervous breakdowns and lock yourself in your room. I mean, just to be blunt.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I learned growing up. I'm 56. There are days where I'm like, I am having a breakdown. I'm locking myself in the room. Don't come talk to me. It's a lot to unlearn for many people and a lot to relearn and practice and refine. But it's important. By the way, what I didn't say, just one more thing I want to say, and then please ask more questions, which is that I talked about the benefits for the school, meaning the leader who is highly skilled, all the benefits for teachers and burnout and, turnover intentions are lower. But I didn't say like the personal benefits. There's a huge personal benefit to this. Better decision making. B, way better relationships. Nobody likes to be around the dysregulated individual, period. 3, way better mental health and well-being. And 4, you're more likely to achieve your goals. And here's the big one. You actually live longer. The research is clear that people with more developed emotion regulation skills live longer, healthier, happier lives. So if that's not worth it, I don't know what is.
Now that is a pretty strong value proposition right there. Yeah, for sure. It's interesting. I was just speaking with a colleague a few weeks ago about the female principal, and something you said just reminded me of that, and that an average female principal only lives 6 years beyond retirement.
Yikes. I hope they retire at 90.
Right. Right, exactly. Exactly. Well, let's pivot again. We've talked quite a bit about your first book, Permission to Feel. We've dabbled a little bit in the new book, and I really want to go full force ahead on the new book. So, share with us a little bit more about that. Where are you going with that? What do you hope that people take away from dealing with feeling?
I think the two big hopeful takeaways are one, emotion regulation is 100% learned. I always joke, Lady Gaga did not get it right. You were not born that way. That's your temperament. That's your personality. That is not your emotion regulation. This is a set of skills that has to be learned. It has to be practiced. It has to be evaluated, and it has to be refined. And I hate to tell you this, but it's going to have to be kind of cultivated across your whole life. It's different than math and science. I remember, I'll never forget, no matter how old I am, that 2 plus 2 equals 4 and 10 divided by 2 is 5. 5 times 5 is 25. That's about as far as I'll go today. And that's just built in. I learned that in elementary or middle school, and there it's solid. It's in my brain. Unfortunately, the emotion side of things is more complicated. We had a pandemic. We had George Floyd's murder. We've had wars going on in our world ever for the last how many years? Israel, Palestine, Ukraine, Central and South America, Africa. We've had political division like we've never witnessed before. At least I've never witnessed before. We could not predict those things. Who knew that? I mean, think about the pandemic. Who knew we were going to be spraying our groceries with Windex? Crazy. And so, as much as we might think, I could handle this, you don't know until you get there. And then, I lost my mom when I was 24 years old. Can't predict it. My mother was going to die of pancreatic cancer, get diagnosed and die within 3 months. It was an intense change for my family. And so, as much as like, Mark, you're strong, you're wise, you're, emotionally skilled, you don't know how things are going to hit you. And so my point of that is that it's not like a skill that you got and it's like learned and you're done. It's kind of an ever kind of lasting process. I just want to put that out there because it makes it different than other kinds of knowledge and skills that we acquire.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because I think what you're regulating changes over the course of your life. When you're 7 years old, you're regulating sharing toys and not liking that or not liking this. When you are 52, you're regulating a whole nother set of things, right? And so, and everywhere in between, that makes a lot of sense.
Exactly. And what an emotion means to you, at kindergarten, like anger in kindergarten, like you just said, is really different than anger in middle school, high school, and now in my 50s. Overwhelm, is so different when you're in high school versus now when you're running a building in middle school. Gosh, it's a lot of work, a lot of overwhelm, I'm certain. And so it's just, you're going to have to learn new strategies in that context. Because emotion regulation, by the way, I have a model for this that is a little long, but I think helpful. Emotion regulation is a set of goals and strategies. We have to want to regulate. We can prevent unwanted emotions. We can also downregulate difficult emotions. Those are two different goals. So you have a faculty meeting. Let's say test scores are down. I'm making this up. Hoping that's not the case. And everybody's activated because they think you're going to be blaming them for the lower scores. And so you're walking into a room of like 60 people who are on edge, waiting to be kind of told something that's bad, and they're going to feel like they're fully responsible for it. Let's just imagine that. You could just not think about how you're feeling or how they're going to feel and just show up and be taken by surprise, or a whirlwind of emotions. Or you can say, okay, I'm about to give this news. These data are going to definitely activate my teachers. How am I going to prepare for that meeting in a way to help them be less activated and help me keep my composure and problem solve in advance? That's proactive regulation, which I think people very rarely do. Or you get there and like all of a sudden someone says, well, if you were a better leader, we wouldn't have so many issues. And then you're like, oh shit, I got to deal with my own feelings now. So it's goals and strategies. And those strategies, vary The strategies that you choose to regulate vary based on what emotion you're feeling. So, for example, when I'm overwhelmed, like talking to myself is not helpful because I'm overwhelmed. I don't want to talk to myself. I go outside and I'll, just stare at a freaking tree, or I'll listen to some music or I'll take a shower, go for a little walk just to decompress. But when I'm really angry at someone, I usually have to find a way to like mentally get out of it. And so the strategies that we use will vary as a function of the emotion. They vary as a function of who we are as people, our culture, our personalities. I'm an introvert. A lot of people are extroverts. An introvert and extrovert are going, working all day. And at the end of the day, I'm like, I hate people. I'm going to the gym to take, a hot yoga class, and hopefully the teacher won't talk too much. And you're going to, you or somebody else is going to like boot camp, CrossFit, and then going out to the sports bar. That's not for me. I tried that. It didn't work. And so our personalities play a big role in how we choose to regulate. And then finally, the context. So right now, I'm on a podcast with you. I'm sitting in my home office. And if I'm getting overwhelmed by this, I can't be like, Andre, I'm sorry. I need a break. I'm going for a walk. He'd be like, it's a little weird. I'm like, okay, whatever. He wants to show everybody how he regulates. It's a little, but I'll have to do something in my head to regulate. So context matters. Who we are matters. The feeling matters. Does that make sense to you?
It does make sense. It makes a lot of sense. One thing that I've been thinking about periodically throughout this conversation is just another skill that we haven't talked about yet that sounds like it's a requisite to be able to do some of these other things is the ability to be metacognitive, to be able to think not just about your thinking, but to be able to think about your feeling. I don't know if that's the same as.
It's meta emotion. Yeah, there is a meta. There is feelings about your feelings. There's metacognition would be kind of thinking about your feelings.
Yeah, but we talk about that a lot at my school. We are a school that's only been open. We're in our third year. But one thing that's really important for me, we had some uh, these kind of pillars that we're building at our school in terms of culture and our philosophy and practice of that. And one of those things was centered around metacognition, but taking it a step further. And I really, and really teaching ourselves so that we can model that for our students.
Yeah, well, there's like the growth mindset piece of emotional intelligence. And so going back to my new book, just for a moment, in terms of that formula kind of guides the book, but then there is the different techniques, within the strategy bucket. And one of the buckets is having kind of a growth mindset around emotion regulation, like a belief, I can do this. I may have failed today, but I will find a better way tomorrow. It's okay. Marc, I'm very, very fortunate. I don't know where this came from. It might have come from my Zen meditation training or just life or being a psychologist. But I have this weird mindset that when I wake up in the morning, I say to myself, Marc, today is the first day of the rest of your life. And so it's free. I'm like free to learn. I'm free to be new. I'm free to, if I'm working out and I feel like I've been like a little slumpy, it's like today's the first day to do better workouts. Today's the first day to eat healthier. Today's the first day to whatever else. And I live my life that way. And not every first day is the great day, but nevertheless, I really do try to have that mindset, especially when things are not going as I'd like. So that's a piece of it. And that, by the way, can be developed early as a teacher and a student or a leader. If someone's really struggling, you just let them know, hey, listen, I believe in you. I know this is hard. I think you can figure it out. And if you can't figure it out on your own, we're going to find a way to figure it out together. I mean, gosh, I wish I could almost cry, like wishing that everybody had that kind of social support in their life. The second is you got to know what you're feeling. You got to have the words. If you don't know what you're really feeling, you don't know what to do with those feelings. And I'll tell you right now, most people have a horrific vocabulary to describe their feelings. I'm fine, good, meh, okay, whatever. We don't know the differences between and among jealousy and envy, or anger and disappointment, anxiety, stress, pressure, fear, and overwhelmed. Then, all right, so I call those the building blocks. You got to have the mindsets and the language. Then you got to know how to deactivate your nervous system. You just do. You have to know how to lower the temperature. If you don't know how to do that, it's going to be hard to do much in life. You have to be able to deactivate it.
What you just said about disconnecting your nervous system, is that what you said? Deactivate it? Yeah. Yeah. Talk more about that.
Well, because emotions have a physiological component. And so when we get triggered or activated, we go into fight, flight, freeze mode. In that fight, flight, freeze mode, we are not able to problem solve. We can't be like, oh, Mark, you should take the high road. No, you go for the jugular. You go to it's survival, man. Like, get out of my way. I'm gonna, it's aggression, it's fighting, it's running for your life. It's just completely freezing. Not a productive place to be for the most part, unless it's a real danger situation. So we have to recognize that our nervous system is activated and find ways to deactivate it. Truthfully, the best way to do that is breathing. It just really, what's nice about breathing is the only involuntary system that we have control over. I studied martial arts for 30 years, and I used to have like these famous teachers. I can control how my blood flow. I'm like, I think that's a little BS. You can control your breath, though. You can deliberately slow down your breath, and that will help lower the temperature, which will help you problem solve. You could just sit still and just do a body scan, but the breath is usually involved in that too. You can do more mindfulness-based exercises to help bring more presence and clarity to your thinking. The second is you got to know how to go from being a self-critic to being more self-compassionate. And I think the negative views that we all, or many of us, have about ourselves are going back to the judgmental people who weren't listening, who weren't empathic as kids. And so we have these, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not good looking enough, whatever it is for you. Everybody's different. But most of us have some form of negative self-talk. We got to learn how to work with that. The third is that we need emotional allies. You got to have an Uncle Marvin as a friend too, not just as a mentor, but we need people that we can, go to when we're really overwhelmed and scared. No one should have to be scared alone. Like, why? Why not have someone who can just be there for us and not solve it for us, but just say, hey, listen, I got you. Let's talk through this. Problem solve together. The next piece is an interesting one, which is the biology of regulation. You gotta something that happened to me today. My book came out. I've been on the road for 2 weeks now, nonstop. And I have 4 more months of nonstop travel. And it's exciting. But like Wednesday, I had like a 12-hour day. I did like 2 virtual, 3 in person. It was like ridiculous. And I had to drive home last night. Got here late. Had a cup of tea. And then decided like why I was really struggling to stay awake, but it was only like 10 o'clock. I normally go to bed like 11:30. I'm like, go to bed. Like, what's the whole need to stay up and do email now at 10:30? And I went to bed and I woke up at 7. I think I had the best night's sleep I've had in a month. And I don't know what it was. I just woke up feeling like I've got the world on a string. I haven't felt that way in a long time. And so, and like my perspective on life was more positive when I woke up. And that's not just Marc Brackett. That is proven scientifically. You need good quality sleep. It restores your brain. It shifts your neurochemicals. It helps you to regulate better. You need to eat nutritious foods as often as possible. Foods that aren't, don't weigh you down, but foods that kind of give your brain nutrients and energy. And you need to move. You got to exercise. And so I knew we were doing this recording, and I got up late, and then I had to get something done. And I'm like, dude, talking to myself here, like, you got to do your workout, because I have to leave now after this for another trip. And I'm like, you got to get the workout in. And so I just did I did it. And and that for me now, I feel like accomplished, right? I got up, I felt good. I had my coffee. I did my workout. I was productive in this podcast. I've got a good life. But I'm joking with you, sort of, but I'm not. It is really important to get the right amount of sleep and quality sleep, to eat the right foods, and to have physical activity. You will be a better leader. You'll be a better parent, a better partner if you do it.
Let's wrap this up with this question. So you mentioned that everybody needs an Uncle Marvin as a friend, as a mentor. Putting myself in the position of this middle schooler that, maybe has a crappy home life, or maybe their home life seems perfect because their family is well-to-do and it seems like they have all the things, but doesn't have an Uncle Marvin. Do you seek out an Uncle Marvin? Do you wait for the Uncle Marvin to magically appear in your life? Like, how does that happen for someone that doesn't have one?
Great question. And I'm going to push you to reframe it as, how do we help every school leader support every teacher in ensuring that every kid in their school has an Uncle Marvin? I like that better. I don't think it should be the responsibility of the kid. I think it needs to be the responsibility of the adults who are raising and teaching kids. And so if parents could show up more, a lot of parents, I don't want to be my own kid's Uncle Marvin. I'm like, that's too much for me to handle right now. But it's true. A lot of parents say, like, I don't think I'm the right fit. It's like, okay. So that means you want to just be judgmental and not listen to your kid and not show them empathy and compassion. Like, what's going on here? I think all of our parents could do a better job. Again, 10% more, 10%, not 50%, just 10% better. I think every school teacher can show up in their classroom, and while they may not be that particular Uncle Marvin, for that kid, like that one adult, they can shape and shift the perceived relationship that kid has with them by showing up with these characteristics. And truthfully, I think every school leader can do the same. And so I don't believe necessarily that we have to, force people to have these relationships, but I think that we can push people to be better people by showing up in their lives, in their relationships, in their jobs with these attributes.
All right. This has been wonderful, Marc. Thank you so much. It's been so great. We're 55 minutes in. We're going to call it a wrap. I'm excited to get the feedback from our Everyday Principal network. I have a hunch that people are going to want to learn more. So maybe someday in the near future, there's a possibility that we can connect again.
Thank you. I'd love that. We should do an Everyday Principal Emotional Intelligence Conference.
I like that. Well, Marc, I know that you are a busy guy, traveling around, promoting the new book. So thanks again for being a guest, and safe travels.
Andre, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it. It was fun.
Thank you for listening to EP Talks. EP Talks is the official podcast for Everyday Principal. Everyday Principal is the leading learning management system focused on principal development. Assets within the LMS include EP Talks, the EP Blog, the EP Collaborative, groups and forums on the most relevant topics in K-12 education, EP University, customized courses and programs aligned with your school district's strategic plan, EP Publishing, opportunities to author and write for Everyday Principle, and EP Micro Learning, opportunities for bite-sized learning. Each asset within the EP LMS is an opportunity for you to grow and earn continuing education credits or clock hours. Contact us today for more information.